an intergovernmental military alliance of 32 member countries. 32 countries, 1 billion people under one flag they didn't vote for. An alliance that has existed for 75 years, that has never lost a member through war, that has the largest combined military force in human history, and one clause at its center that has only been triggered once in all that time. Article 5. An attack on one is an attack on all. September 12, 2001, the morning after the towers fell, 32 ambassadors sat in a room in Brussels and voted unanimously for the first time ever. They invoked a clause written in 1949 for Soviet tanks. They used it because of 19 men with box cutters. You have no idea any of this exists yet. You're 19. You just signed the papers. Level 1. The recruit. Your country joined NATO 6 years ago. You were 13 when it happened. You remember the news coverage, politicians shaking hands, flags, speeches about security and belonging. You didn't fully understand what it meant. You still don't. But you signed the military papers anyway because the pay was better than anything else in your town, and because your older brother came home from basic training looking like someone had rebuilt him from the ground up, more focused, more grounded, like he knew where he stood in the world. You want to know where you stand. The recruitment office smells like cheap carpet and coffee. A sergeant shakes your hand. He says, "Welcome." He says your country is part of the most powerful alliance in human history. He says you are now connected to 32 nations, 3 million active service personnel, nuclear capability, the most sophisticated military command structure ever built. Then he hands you a standard issue kit bag and tells you to be at the base gate by 5 a.m. The first week is basic physical training. You already knew it would be hard. You did not know it would be this specific kind of hard, where the exhaustion is less about your body and more about learning to exist inside a structure that has no patience for your previous self. The second week, they start explaining what NATO standard actually means. NATO has over 1,300 standardization agreements. They're called STANAGs. They cover everything: the caliber of ammunition, the fuel your vehicles run on, the radio frequencies you broadcast on, the hand signals you use when communications fail, the way you mark positions on a map, the medical triage codes you use when soldiers are down. The reason is simple and terrifying. 32 countries have to fight as one. Without these standards, a British soldier cannot call in air support from an American pilot. A German tank cannot refuel at a Polish depot. A French medic cannot use Italian supplies in the field. One incompatible radio frequency, one wrong caliber of bullet, and the alliance falls apart at the moment it matters most. You memorize the standards. You train to them. You don't question them. That comes later. Level 2. The operator. You're 21. Your unit ships to Bavaria, Germany, for your first NATO joint exercise. Steadfast Defender. 90,000 troops from all 32 nations, the largest NATO field exercise since the Cold War. When the numbers were released publicly, military analysts called it a signal, not a war game, a demonstration. You don't think about the politics. You think about the fact that you have never been outside your country before. The training ground near Grafenwehr is controlled chaos. American M1 Abrams tanks parked next to British Challengers, Dutch F-35s circling overhead, French Legionnaires doing their own version of everything slightly differently from everyone else, with a confidence that suggests they consider this a feature. Norwegian special forces who arrive say almost nothing and are genuinely frightening in exercises. Romanian soldiers who remind you a little of home. You meet Marco on the second day at the field kitchen. He's Italian, from Naples, 23 years old, and he treats each meal like it might be his last, and every person he meets like they're already his friend. He speaks broken English the same way you do, which makes conversation feel like two people solving a puzzle together, rather than either of them performing fluency. You spend 2 weeks trying to coordinate a simulated combined assault with soldiers who speak 6 different languages, carry 6 different standard weapon systems, and 6 different institutional cultures baked into them through years of national training. It is harder than anything you expected. On day 3, your radio net goes down during an exercise because your frequency protocol doesn't match the British unit you're supposed to be supporting. A problem that should not happen because of the Stanags. It happens anyway because someone in your chain input a wrong digit. The British unit holds position for 11 minutes waiting for support that doesn't come. In a real scenario, those 11 minutes have a cost. Your sergeant does not let you forget it. But here is what the exercise also teaches you. NATO unity is not natural. It is built, painfully, expensively, over decades. It requires constant maintenance and constant training because the moment countries stop exercising together, stop learning each other's procedures, the alliance begins to rust in ways that show up when it's too late. The exercise also teaches you something else, something nobody said out loud, but every soldier on that training ground understood. The fictional adversary in the scenario documents has no name, just a color code, Red Force. But the equipment in the simulation is Russian. The tactics are Russian. The geography of the scenario maps onto Eastern Europe. Everyone knows who Red Force is. Russia is watching these exercises. Russia is always watching. That is the point. You go home from Germany different. The world got bigger and smaller at the same time. Level 3, the deployed. You're 23. You get your first real deployment. Not Afghanistan, not a distant desert. You go to Estony, 40 kilometers from the Russian border. After Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, NATO established the Enhanced Forward Presence, 4 multinational battle groups permanently positioned on the eastern flank. Estony led by the British, Latvia led by Canadians, Lithuania led by Germans, Poland led by Americans, roughly 1,000 each.
They call it a tripwire. That word sounds technical? It isn't. A tripwire is a very specific strategic choice. It means we know 1,000 soldiers cannot stop an armored invasion. That is not the point. The point is that Russia cannot invade Estonia without killing British soldiers, without killing NATO soldiers, without triggering a formal Article 5 response from all 32 members. The tripwire makes the cost of invasion political, existential, untenable. You are the tripwire. You patrol a border that smells like pine forest and cold mud and the specific silence of a place where everyone is measuring distances. The base was expanded after 2022, after Russia moved on Ukraine and NATO stopped issuing careful statements and started issuing serious infrastructure, better housing, better equipment, reinforced ammunition storage. The Estonians are not subtle about what they think is coming. They have been saying it since 2014. They were saying it before 2014. They lived inside the Soviet system. They know the logic. They have been building their own defenses in parallel with NATO's because they understand that 1,000 foreign soldiers and a political promise are the floor, not the ceiling. At night, Russian electronic warfare systems jam your communications for 20 minutes at a time, not to attack, to practice, to remind you they can. Your signals officer logs every incident. There is a long file of them. You don't shoot, they don't shoot. The distance between not shooting and shooting is smaller here than anywhere else on Earth. You feel it in how you sleep. You feel it in the way your hand knows where your weapon is before your brain does. Marco messages you from a training rotation in Romania. He asks if you're scared. You tell him you're fine. You are not fine. Fine is the correct answer. Level 4, the watch officer. You're 26, a promotion, a transfer. You are assigned to SHAPE, Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, Mons, Belgium. Not Brussels, where NATO's political headquarters sits. Mons, where the military machine actually runs. A compound that looks from the outside like a small American suburb relocated to the Belgian countryside. Manicured lawns, yellow fire hydrants, a commissary selling American products. 13,000 military and civilian staff from all 32 nations inside a facility that has been NATO's operational brain since 1967, when it relocated here from Paris after France withdrew from the Integrated Military Command. France, founding member of NATO, once pulled out of the military command structure entirely for 43 years, rejoined in 2009. That fact alone tells you more about how the alliance actually works than any official briefing will. You work in the Operations Center, the floor that never sleeps. Every active NATO mission feeds into this room in real time. Kosovo, where NATO has maintained a peacekeeping force called KFOR since June 1999 and still does today, 25 years later, because the political situation never reached the resolution everyone expected. The Aegean Sea Patrol, the Baltic air policing missions, where NATO member jets scramble from bases in Lithuania and Estonia to intercept and escort Russian military aircraft that test alliance airspace on a near-weekly basis. 60 interceptions in a recent 6-month period, each one logged, each one a communication, not a battle. Screens, troop positions, air corridors, naval movements, intelligence from 32 national agencies filtered and fused into one picture. Your job is to watch, to notice, to flag anything that breaks the pattern before the pattern breaks something else. 12-hour shifts, cold coffee, the quiet, specific hum of a room processing more information per hour than most institutions handle in a month. The number you carry in the back of your mind, the one nobody told you formally but every person on this floor knows, is 1. Article 5 has been invoked once. Once in 75 years. Once in the entire Cold War, the entire post-Cold War, through 9/11, through Iraq, through Ukraine. The clause written for a Soviet tank column rolling through the Fulda Gap was first used because of 19 men with box cutters and 4 planes. You think about what invokes it a second time, what it would look like on these screens, how many minutes between the event and the first ambassadors being woken from their beds. You try not to think about it. On the watch floor, you learn to carry 2 things simultaneously: the weight of what you're watching and the discipline to keep watching anyway. Level 5, the staff officer. You're 29. You are inside the machine now, fully inside. The North Atlantic Council meets in Brussels, 32 ambassadors, 1 from every member nation, sitting around a table where every major alliance decision must be approved by all of them, unanimously, every single one. No exceptions, no majority votes, no Security Council vetoes. Unanimous or nothing moves. That sounds like a safeguard. It is. It is also a choke point. Hungary has used the unanimity requirement to block and delay alliance decisions on multiple occasions since 2022, negotiating bilateral concessions from the United States and others, while collective urgency waited. Turkey held Sweden's NATO membership application in suspension for 20 months, from June 2022 to March 2024, extracting promises about extradition of Kurdish political figures, promises about F-16 fighter jet sales, concessions that had nothing to do with Sweden's military capability and everything to do with Turkish domestic politics. Sweden joined NATO in March 2024. The addition added Finland and Sweden to the alliance's northern flank, giving NATO continuous territorial access along the entire Baltic Sea coastline. Strategically significant, long overdue, 2 years late because of a rule that exists to prevent unilateral action and occasionally prevents any action at all. You sit in planning meetings where officers from countries that have centuries of difficult history between them have to produce shared documents and sign them. You watch a French general and an American general argue for 40 minutes about a single adjective in a paragraph that will never be read outside this building. You understand by the end of that argument that the adjective isn't about language, it's about precedent, about which nation's doctrine the document reflects, about institutional credit and historical reputation. You learn to translate not just languages, but entire military cultures. The French believe they invented operational thinking, and are not entirely wrong. The Americans believe they invented winning, and have enough recent history on both sides of that argument to keep you occupied for years. The British believe they invented restraint, and occasionally they have. The Germans believe rigorous procedure is what separates civilization from catastrophe, and given their specific 20th century, they have earned that belief. The Eastern Europeans believe everyone else still fundamentally underestimates what Russia is willing to do, and the events of 2022 have done significant damage to the counterarguments. They are all right. They are all wrong. Your job is to make them work together anyway. You are good at your job. You are also slowly understanding something that will take a few more years to fully land. The alliance's greatest asset is not its hardware. It is the habit of coordination, the practiced muscle memory of 32 different systems learning over decades to trust each other enough to act.
You're 32. Your clearance goes up another level. Cosmic Top Secret. That is not a dramatic name invented for effect. That is NATO's actual highest classification level. It exists above Top Secret. It requires a separate vetting process, separate physical handling procedures, separate storage facilities. Documents at this level cannot leave designated buildings. Some cannot be transmitted electronically under any circumstances. Some cannot be discussed on any device connected to any network, ever. You are now read into the operational war plans. You spend 6 months helping update one of them. The work is detailed, methodical. You plan which roads reinforcement convoys will use moving east from Central Europe. You identify which bridges can sustain main battle tank weight and which will collapse under load. You calculate transit times, how many hours to move an armored division from Germany to the Polish border at full combat load. You plan for the scenario where those roads are cratered by airstrikes before the convoys reach them, where those bridges are destroyed in the first hours, where reinforcements don't arrive within the window the defensive plan requires. You are writing the script for a war you hope no one ever reads past the cover page. What changes you is the discovery of how close the world has come to that script being used. In November 1983, NATO ran an exercise called Able Archer 83, a command post simulation of escalating conventional conflict followed by nuclear release. It was designed to test NATO's nuclear authorization procedures. Soviet intelligence, monitoring the exercise through signals intercept in human sources, could not conclusively determine it was a simulation. Soviet nuclear forces in Eastern Europe were elevated to their highest alert status. Soviet aircraft were placed on standby for preemptive strike. The world came closer to nuclear war than almost anyone knew for more than a decade after the fact, because of a training exercise that looked too much like the real thing. You sit with that information in a classified briefing room in Mons, Belgium, long after the briefing is over, because it takes a few minutes to put it down. You close your laptop, you drive home, you make dinner. You try to be a person who does not think about Able Archer 83 every time a large exercise is scheduled. You mostly succeed. You're 36. You command a multinational battle group on the eastern flank. 800 soldiers, British, Estonian, French, Danish, Belgian. 5 languages, 5 national armies with 5 distinct cultures and 5 different institutional histories, all of them under your command. Marco comes through on a liaison rotation. He is a major now. There are lines around his eyes that were not in Grafenwehr. We eat in the mess hall, and he asks if you ever think about getting out, taking a defense industry job, using the clearances and the connections for something that ends at 6 p.m. and doesn't follow you home. You tell him you think about it all the time. He laughs and orders more food. You lead a major live exercise on the perimeter, simulated Russian armored breakthrough. Your battle group is tasked with holding a specific defensive line for 72 hours before scripted reinforcements arrive. You plan it meticulously, you execute it well. In the exercise, the line holds. You know what the exercise cannot simulate. In a real conflict scenario, full combat-ready reinforcements from NATO's main contingency bases take 7 to 10 days to reach the Baltic states. Your battle group holds for 72 hours. The gap between 72 hours and 10 days exists in every planning document. Everyone who reads those documents knows it is there. The battle group is still positioned here. Because the alternative is no battle group,
no tripwire, no credible deterrence. And if the deterrence fails, the question of whether the reinforcements could have arrived in time becomes academic. You do not hold a briefing explaining this to your soldiers. You don't need to. The soldiers from the Baltic nations already understand it at a level that has nothing to do with briefings. They grew up with it. The Danish soldiers and the French soldiers and the British soldiers are starting to understand it too, after enough rotations, after enough nights listening to the electronic warfare jamming tick on and off. You are not expected to win the first 72 hours. You are expected to make the cost of starting them higher than any rational actor would accept. That is the entire strategic logic of your existence here. It requires you to be willing to be the cost. You're 40. You're attached to the North Atlantic Council as a senior military advisor. This is where you learn the thing that took you 21 years of service to fully understand. NATO is not primarily a military organization. It is a political organization that maintains a military capability. The distinction is not semantic. It changes how everything works. In 1949, the founding members committed to spending 2% of their GDP on collective defense. That was the floor, the minimum required to maintain credible capability. For the majority of NATO's existence, the majority of members have fallen short of it without serious consequence. In 2014, after Russia moved on Crimea, 3 of 28 members were meeting the target. 3. The alliance that had just renewed its collective commitment at the Wales Summit had 25 members publicly signed to a standard that 25 members were not meeting. By 2024, after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, 23 of 32 members were finally at or above 2%. The invasion produced in 18 months what 2 decades of American pressure could not. You sit with that information in a classified briefing room in Mons, Belgium, long after the briefing is over, because it takes a few minutes to put it down. You close your laptop, you drive home, you make dinner. You try to be a person who does not think about Able Archer 83 every time a large exercise is scheduled. You mostly succeed.
You're 44. You are read into the Nuclear Planning Group. There are approximately 100 American B-61 nuclear gravity bombs stored at NATO bases in 5 European countries: Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Turkey. The exact number remains classified. The general locations are, at this point, an open secret discussed in academic journals and think tank reports. The arrangement has a name: nuclear sharing. Here is what nuclear sharing means in practice. The weapons are American property. American personnel control physical access and the arming systems. But under a NATO nuclear mission, Allied aircraft carry them: Belgian F-16 pilots, German Tornado crews, Italian Typhoon squadrons, aircrew from non-nuclear nations trained under NATO's nuclear certification program, capable of delivering weapons that require an American authorization code to arm and a NATO political authorization to use. 2 keys, both required, neither sufficient alone. The Nuclear Planning Group convenes twice a year. Defense ministers, senior military commanders, the alliance's most senior intelligence officials. They review doctrine, they review targeting procedures, they certify that the capability is current, that the crews are qualified, that the authorization chain from heads of state through the group to the tactical level is intact and understood. You have now attended enough of these meetings to understand what nuclear deterrence actually is at the operational level. It is a promise maintained through demonstrated capability. The promise: attacking NATO will produce a response that ends the attacking nation as a functioning state. For that promise to deter, it must be credible. For it to be credible, the capability must be real, current, and visibly maintained. For it to be maintained, people like you attend meetings twice a year and review procedures that you hope will never be executed. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, American nuclear-armed aircraft were kept at 15-minute alert at bases across Europe. Pilots sat in cockpits for hours. Some of the authorization protocols in use at the time were later assessed as insufficiently secure. The full range of near accidents during the Cold War's nuclear standoff is documented in declassified records that make your current procedures look conservative. They are conservative by design. You drive home.
Your daughter is at the kitchen table doing homework. She looks up and asks how your day was. You tell her meetings all day, boring. She nods and goes back to her textbook. You make dinner, you set the table, you sit across from her and ask about her coursework. You do not think about the B-61s. You make yourself not think about them, the same way you have learned to make yourself not think about Able Archer, about the 72-hour gap, about the unanimity requirement, about all of it. You are very good at compartmentalization. You have had a long time to practice. Level 10, the ghost. You're 52. You retired 14 months ago. Your daughter is in her second year of university, international relations. She asks you about NATO sometimes, careful, well-formed questions that show she has read serious books and talked to serious people. She wants to understand the thing her father spent his adult life inside. You answer the ones you can. There are more of those than you expected. Most of what NATO does is not secret. The structure, the missions, the doctrine, the budget arguments, the Article 5 debates, most of it exists in public documents and academic literature and the records of parliamentary hearings. What is not in any of those places is the texture of it, what it feels like to sit in a planning room writing scenarios for wars you're hoping no one fights, what it feels like to watch through operational feeds as the alliance processes a real crisis and the outcome genuinely is unclear, what it feels like to understand at the level of direct professional experience rather than abstract policy analysis how much of global security rests on political will that can be altered by a single election in any of 32 countries. You carry that texture. You will carry it until you die. Marco retired 2 years before you. He went back to Naples. He sends you photographs of food, long tables, wine, his children growing up in a city that does not think about NATO tripwires or nuclear planning groups or unanimous council votes. You send photographs back. It is the most honest correspondence available to two people who spent 20 years doing something they cannot fully describe to anyone who was not there. NATO has existed for 75 years. It has never lost a member through war. It has never failed to respond when Article 5 was invoked, and it was invoked once, and the response was genuine. It has conducted 18 major operations and missions since its founding. It has expanded from 12 countries to 32, absorbing nations that once were missile targets in Soviet war plans, nations that once had Soviet forces stationed inside them. That expansion is either the alliance's greatest achievement or the source of its most serious current risk, depending on which conversation you're in and who is talking. You have been in both conversations. You are not sure they are incompatible. You watch the news now differently than you did before. You hear the gaps between what is said publicly and what you know was decided privately. You recognize the specific diplomatic phrasing that means the opposite of what it sounds like. You see a military movement described as routine and know it is not routine. You can read the alliance's posture in the same way you once read pattern-of-life imagery, looking for what is different from yesterday. Somewhere in a country that recently joined the alliance, a 19-year-old signed papers this morning. They know the word NATO. They know their country is now covered by Article 5. They feel safer, maybe, or more purposeful, or simply less alone in a world that is larger and less predictable than anything their parents told them to expect. They don't know yet what the guarantee costs. They don't know the rooms they'll sit in, the plans they'll write, the weight they'll carry home every night and try to leave at the door. They don't know about Able Archer, or the B-61s, or the 3 members still below 2% this year, or the unanimity vote that almost didn't happen. They'll find out. They always do. The alliance continues. It has to. Not because it is perfect, because it is the practiced, expensive, politically difficult, daily renewed alternative to every country standing alone. And so far, that has been enough. If this changed how you see the world, subscribe. A new hidden system every week.